Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Emanuel Kuczycki. I'm the head of Scholarly Communication Research Group, and I'm really happy that we are back with our series of seminar Science and Semi-Peripheries. And today we have a great pleasure to have Lai Ma with us. And our guest speaker is assistant professor at the School of Information and Communication Studies at the University College Dublin. And Lai will provide us an extremely interesting presentation on metrics and epistemic injustice. This topic of metrics, the performativity of metrics and epistemic injustice is very in line with our research interests, and taking into account that a lot of people registered on the seminar, and I hope that I admitted all of them to join us at this very moment. All of us are waiting live for you, and the floor is yours. You can share the screen and please provide your talk.
All right, so can you see the slide? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Emmanuel. So hello, I am Lai Ma from University College Dublin. As Emmanuel has mentioned, I'm very honored and excited to be presenting at this seminar today. So thank you again for the invitation and the introduction. Before we get into the muddy waters between metrics and epistemic injustice, let me tell you more about where I'm coming from, in the sense that why I started looking at metrics and why can I stop thinking about it. So I did my PhD at Indiana University, Bloomington. Some years ago now. The department was then led by the legendary and prominent scholar in scientometrics and bibliometrics, Professor Blaise Cronin. But I was not doing anything about bibliometrics or scientometrics. I was actually working on the concept of information for my dissertation, asking useless questions like, what is information? And I thought about the questions through reading. Now that I look back, that I didn't really understand readings, works by Foucault, Giddens, Habermas, and at one point, I even read Hegel. At the same time, I was also introduced to literature in science and technology studies and late Wittgenstein's philosophy of language. But what I'm really trying to say here is that I make no claims to be a sociologist or a philosopher or an STS scholar. So let's get back to my dissertation. So it was mainly concerned with the epistemological assumptions of the concept of information. But because of the very strong bibliometric, epistemic, cultural influences at Indiana, I also included a section on citations as a form of information. So what drew me to focus on publication and citation-based metrics were two incidents as an early career researcher in my current position. The first one happened after I finished a small funded project and submitted my report. I received an email from the research manager who asked me this particular question. What is the journal impact factor of your publication? And sometime later, the marketing manager of my department asked me the same question. And I thought, do they know what is the journal impact factor? Also, why do they care? So that's when I first started to think more about what I now describe as the political economy of knowledge production and scholarly communication. I assume the audience of this particular seminar has a fairly good understanding of the journal impact factor or citation-based metrics and so on. But let's have a brief review of what metrics are for. So on the one hand, here on the left-hand side, we are thinking about metrics are data for research. When we think about science of science, meta research, bibliometric and scientometric studies, and scholarly network analysis, researchers often make use of citations and publication and citation-based metrics as data. On the other hand, they are used as evidence of research impact or perceived influences in a wide range of things, including tenure and promotion applications, grant applications, rankings, university marketing materials, strategic plans, and so on and so forth. So when you think about it, this is like the dual use of metrics. They are based on the assumption that citations and metrics are neutral and objective, as if we are measuring the length of a table or the number of leaves on a tree. But surely the uses on the right-hand side here as evidence of research impact in a wide range of documents have a significant impact on the validity of data for bibliometric and scientometric studies. But we'll save this point for another discussion. Today, I want to consider metrics as a steering medium or a technology of control or a standard. I'm not totally sure, and I have reservations about all of the three terms, and I'd welcome your thoughts. So, where to start? It is evident that metrics used in research evaluation have led to gaming, malpractices, and misconduct, and that metrics have adverse events on research culture and knowledge production. This is the story being told and retold in the past few years. The problems are real, and we have seen statements of responsible metrics published and a dashboard being developed to track hiring and promotion criteria under the TARA project. But I suspect that these efforts will have limited effects if they are not futile. There are two related reasons. One is that metrics have become a steering medium in knowledge production. And the second reason is that metrics perpetuate epistemic injustice. I will first talk about these two main threats based on my previous works, and then I will contemplate how they can be understood in the context of work systems to respond to the title of this seminar series, Science and Semi-Peripheries. So, when writing a chapter for the book Inquiring into Academic Timescape, edited by Philip Foster, I was forced in a good way, to think about the time dimension of metrics. It was my first attempt to consider metrics as a technology, and I ended up with three ways by which metrics save time, which is a very important thing in contemporary society because time is money, right? So in the chapter, I argue that metrics save time in three ways. And first, metrics saves time by enabling information retrieval. It was the primary function when Eugene Garfield first conceived of the citation index. That is, the idea that citations can be used in a search algorithm. The number of citations is now used to rank the relevance of articles on Google Scholar, for example, and then metrics, in other words, save time by improving search results. Second, metrics save time by facilitating decision-making in tenure and promotion committees, university management, because now, the committee members and panel members, they can just look at the journals you have published in and the number of publications and citations you have. there is no need to read the publications anymore, and they don't need to interpret or understand the significance of impact anymore. And third, metrics also induce competition in the academic marketplace such that researchers endeavor to do more and better. Market-based competition can replace mentoring and in general, the academic discourse as to what is good, what is important, what is not so good. All right, so the chase after metrics can produce the best results. Metrics as time-saving devices open up a question: how can metrics perform multiple functions if they were merely indicators or measurements of research impact? And this brought me back to the question, what are metrics? If it is a technology, how does it become embedded in the larger system of knowledge production? And when I say larger system of knowledge production, I mean that the system of knowledge production that is beyond just the researchers or the research community or the academic discourse, but involving research managers, funding agencies, publishers, government departments, and so on. So if metrics have somehow become a technology of control, it still depends on a common trust in number, in the sense that quantitative indicators are trustworthy and they can avoid subjective judgments and the messiness of discussions and disagreements. Metrics are clean and objective. No arguments needed when we look at the university rankings that Trinity College Dublin is better than University College Dublin. The trust in metrics turn metrics into a standard of sorts, notwithstanding that being indicators of research quality and impacts are still actually contested. Metrics are trusted and then established, legitimized, and internalized through their uses with the following conditions. First, metrics are regarded as accurate and valid representations of research quality. Second, metrics are useful in accounting exercises as they can be recorded consistently. And third, users can take metrics data as given. Now, in reality, the nature of metrics become kind of quite uncertain when embedded in the research infrastructure and the system of knowledge production, in the sense that they are no longer merely or simply indicators or measurements. As Burroughs observes, metrics have become numbers that change the relationship between measure and value, and that enact competitive market processes and quantified control. The system of knowledge production can be viewed as a, quote, a world in which the role of number and numbers has come to take political precedence over the aesthetic, the affective, and the hermeneutic, and a world in which structures of feeling have been consequently fundamentally altered, end quote. In a different paper, Mario Biaggiani describes how the tokenization of metrics becomes the value in and of itself. So, quote, impact as value is treated like a valuable good, but it is not clear what kind of good it is. That impact is also interchangeably referred to as importance, significance, visibility, and sometimes even quality points to an unavoidable semantic drift, suggesting that we are no longer dealing with the material cost of a specific citation, but with a concept in search of an elusive referent. Citations have thus become reified as numerical icons of an unspecific, non-present value. Because value is left undefined, the citations have moved from being the units of measurements of value to become valuable tokens in and of themselves. That is, the citation has become the value. So, end quote. So when we talk about the chase after metrics, whether the number of publications or the number of citations or the H-index, the value lies in the number themselves and not the numbers supposedly represent or indicate. This is a lot of us who will be familiar with the Goodhart's law describes. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So the time-saving characteristics and trust in quantitative indicators reinforce the importance of metrics to the extent that metrics become a steering medium that has a leverage power in the system of knowledge production. And this is how it works, because the more citations the publisher receives, the more it can dominate the system of knowledge production by attracting more quality submissions and by driving away those without a track record. The more metrics are used by university rankings, the more importance the packaged data indexing and data analytics services provide, which in turn increase the visibility of existing high-impact journals, publishers, researchers, and knowledge fields. The more individuals and institutions trust metrics as valuable tokens, the more their actions are guided by the values they represent. In the system of knowledge production, metrics become what is called a non-linguistic steering medium that mediates research practices and scholarly communication, while the main function is to relieve the burden of lengthy discussions and negotiations in research evaluations. Save time, remember. Metrics are increasingly embedded in information infrastructure where scholars and researchers create, coordinate, and construct research outputs, which in turn enables a metrics culture. Now, the problem, of course, is that what and how we count can be discriminating. It is a power play, if you will put it that way, because any kind of categorization and rankings by metrics can entail segregating individuals and institutions into different social status, by which their access to funding, resources, and social networks are determined. At the same time, these social categories can also deflate the value of scholarly work of lower impact, such as those in the arts and humanities and the theoretical and pure research in the sciences and the social sciences. So the idea is that metrics save time by inducing competition and create social categories led me to think about the relationship between metrics and epistemic injustice. In this particular paper, I argue that the use of metrics is a symptom of the competitive and meritocratic research culture, and that ill-considered competition can lead to very bad consequences and exacerbate systemic inequalities and epistemic injustice. So first of all, we have to understand what is epistemic injustice. So obviously, I didn't invent this particular term. This is, I think, most known as a work by Miranda Fricker in her book, Epistemic Injustice, Power and the Ethics of Knowing. And there are actually two concepts related to epistemic injustice in her work. One is testimonial injustice, and the other is hermeneutic injustice. I have taken actually mostly about testimonial injustice in this particular paper, which she defines as, quote, that testimonial injustice occurs when prejudice causes a hearer to give a deflated credibility to a speaker's word and is, quote, systematically connected to other kinds of actual and potential injustice. So what it means is that epistemic injustice is really related to the perception of prejudicial stereotypes. For example, the ways by which the testimonials of ethnic minorities are often degraded, if not outright rejected, in social situations for who they are, but not what they say. So let's consider the Black Lives Movement, which makes explicit that the testimonials of Black residents are routinely degraded, if not deemed unbelievable. This can happen when a teenager in a hoodie walking on the street or a Black college student's work is systematically degraded and seen as of lower quality. Put another way, their testimonials are not believed or recognized as a knower. Consequently, what they say is often trivialized or simply as if it does not matter. The problem is that it is not about the contents of what they say, but it is about who they are or what their skin color is. Epistemic injustice is a powerful concept as it opens up questions about inequalities and injustices from the position of a knower, that whether you actually can contribute to knowledge or you know something. It shed new light on the analysis of systemic and structural injustice in our society. So, and then we have to ask that question, how do metrics have anything to do with inequalities and injustice? It is generally agreed that with or without metrics, gender and racial discrimination in research and universities is nothing new. But what I want to argue is that metrics exacerbate inequalities and injustice because of them being used as driving forces for competition. Where do we start? First, think about league tables when we think about competition. Journal rankings, the most cited researchers, they all engender competition. They signify the winners and the losers of higher education and research. To rank, metrics are often used to support the results. Journals can be ranked by score or similar. Publications can be ranked by the number of citations. Researchers can be ranked by the number of citations and index, and universities can be ranked by a composite score that presumably represent how good they are. Without quantitative indicators, we could be arguing who is the best for forever. And a lot of times we want the winners and the losers. We don't want to argue too much. So once rankings and shortlists are created, it is as if there's no doubt that the results are based on fair comparison. Their methodology and data sources are seldom questioned. Quantitative indicators are more trustworthy than expert opinions. Also, it appears in trusting league tables and rankings. The scholarly community has assigned moral and political authority to those who create the rankings and shortlist, and to those who produce the metrics. Metrics then become standards of excellence. So I don't know at this point whether it's just a technology or a standard or something else. But in any case, as if metrics are standards, it is as if they cannot be discriminatory and that they are not affected by any kind of systemic or structural inequalities. The idea that counting in and of itself as a power play is largely forgotten. Metrics can then be used to induce competition to get the best and most out of researchers, as if questions about inequalities and injustice are totally irrelevant in this fair game of research quality and impact. So I found this quote from the book called The Meritocracy Trap. Did I say right? That's right. At the same time, I was really actually watching Squid Game as well when I was writing the paper. But we can talk about that later. So, quote, here it says, meritocracy trap. It is in an all-encompassing, never-ending struggle. Every colleague is a competitor. At every stage, the alternative to victory is elimination. A very, very grim picture here. And this is very true in competitive sports when you think about it. You know, when you're thinking about you're going to play a football match or you're going to race in a marathon, for example. In competitive sports, the team or individual, you're going to try to win. And the idea basically is that you're better than the other runner or the other team and so on. All right, so the team or individual who scores or runs more or runs faster or jumps farther is the winner. Although there are times when some would comment that a team actually played better in that particular football match, even though they didn't score. But nevertheless, there is no question about the scoreboard. There is no question who has won the match. The problem is when we actually think about using metrics to evaluate or to rank universities or rank individuals, can we say this very same, that whoever scores more is the winner? Is a publication that has received 5 citations is better than the one that had received 2 citations? All right. So, or we can bump the numbers bigger, 300 compared to 299 and so on and so forth. So the answer is probably no, because we, research is not like a race or a football match. When one competes on the same ground rules or conditions at the same time and place, the criteria to win in a particular match or a race is relatively clear and transparent, notwithstanding one can quip about how the other team or person actually played better, or how the referee was somewhat biased. But the thing is, the scoreboard of metrics for scholarly work is meaningless when the publications and their authors and affiliations are not in the same race or the same game. Nevertheless, they put researchers, departments, universities, and even countries in competition as if these numbers are comparable. It is as if the scores of a football match can be compared to the one of a rugby game. Oops. All right. So the list of publications and researchers ordered by metrics, ranked by metrics, are not the same as the results of a marathon, because individuals can build on cumulative advantage, while some are very much disadvantaged. More importantly, league tables, university rankings, ranking researchers using H index and so on, they neglect the very many factors that constitute barriers to success, such as factors that lead to disparity in productivity and performance, including implicit or unconscious biases based on gender and race. All right. So the presumed objectivity of metrics leads to the belief that scholarly works will be evaluated and judged solely based on their novelty, originality, and contributions. In reality, the visibility and reception of scholarly works is probably not only a matter of its novelty or potential contributions. The reasons that works of women and ethnic minorities are read less and cited less can be due to the perception of quality based on systemic and unconscious biases or even outright discrimination. So a person can make a decision to read or cite an article or a book judging by the name of the author or perhaps the affiliation. That is, rather than the contents of the book or the article. And if one looks up a person on Google Scholar, for example, women and ethnic minorities tend to have lower number of citations, and as a result, a lower H index. Hence, it would seem that the quality of work is low if you really actually take metrics as the representations of research quality and impact, and their performance unsatisfactory, which further decreases the chance of these works to be taken seriously. Similarly, those who are working on emerging, controversial, or marginal topics can be subject to unjust assessments because their works are deemed to be of lesser quality and significance and are unworthy of being supported by grants or employment. The use of metrics leads to epistemic injustice because they cause the hearer, those who evaluate, or even just readers, to give a deflated level of credibility of individuals and works that are ranked supposedly lower. The academic hierarchies ordered by metrics, are seemingly objective, implying that the competition is fair and just. It is kind of like as if we are going to play a football match, and that the contenders are competing on equal footing. Assuming that if one's work is of good quality, groundbreaking, then your metrics should be high, and that's the proof of furthering one's fame, prestige, and performance. And this is very much within what we call meritocracy. It is as if success in the pursuit of metrics is only a matter of hard work, really, talent, or maybe a little bit of luck. It doesn't really take into account what we think about biases and inequalities that would put some researchers into a disadvantageous position to begin with, and the use of metrics as an arbitrator of success can reproduce then, as we have talked about, how you will be seen as of a low impact researcher, and that's being reinforced because of metrics, and then the existing power relationships and systemic inequalities in the society at large. So is it true that metrics leads to competition? So you might ask. So I know that this one is more of a think piece and theoretical paper, but I did find some evidence, and there are actually evidence. There's a lot of evidence elsewhere as well. So the Wellcome Trust report, for example, is called "What Researchers Think About the Culture They Work In," published in 2020, I think. It says the researchers accept competition, is very core in the culture as a necessary part of working in research, but think that it is often becoming aggressive and harmful. They also have widespread concerns about job security, especially in academia, when 78% of the respondents in that particular survey agree that high levels of competition had created unkind and aggressive research conditions. So if we go back to that particular quote from the meritocracy trap, the idea that the competition is so aggressive that you have to eliminate your colleague. And when we think about that, if the priority is to win, and in this particular case is that whether one is going to get a job or get promotion or get an award, systemic biases are less likely to be shaken because metrics doesn't take into account all of these different injustices and inequalities because it is perceived as a fair game. It is about meritocracy. It doesn't take into account other factors that will affect how people are being read, how they are being cited, and so on. So even though metrics in and of itself, I would say that I don't think the designer, whoever designed the metrics, was actually really thinking about, I'm going to use this particular tool to actually create injustices between rich and poor, black and white, or men and women, and so on. In fact, I think the problem is that we actually don't think about metrics can create competition, and that actually leads to the idea that we don't consider injustice and inequalities in the academic reward system. So the very use of metrics and the pressure of rankings are seldom considered, when we actually talk about any kind of what we call in Ireland equality, diversity, and inclusion questions. It is as if this is outside of the academic reward system, outside of this competition that we are all enrolled in. However, the scholarly world is not immune to epistemic injustice. Some people are given deflated credibility, just like when we talked about the example of Black Lives Matter, how a teenager would be kind of like his words might not be believed, and so on. Or when someone's work is being evaluated, from maybe actually even a different standard because of who they are or not what they say. Metrics should create, supposedly, if it is a very fair game, a fair and just comparison regardless of one's background. But that can be far from truth, as the naive assumptions of metrics objectivity neglects the fact that when metrics become instrumental in rankings of the various results, they enroll researchers and institutions in a fierce competition and unending race. So in essence, a competition has its winners and losers. When you rank people, when you rank university, you're not trying to achieve equality. You are trying to achieve inequality. The use of metrics then fosters competitions between individuals and institutions by benchmarking, rankings, and creating hierarchies. Since these competitions are continuous, meaning one's place in the ranking can be surpassed by others, there is the tendency to increase productivity and performance simply to avoid falling out of place. And once the academic market becomes a ground for competition, then there is a danger that we are depreciating the value of humility and solidarity. And so that was the paper, Metrics and Epistemic Injustice. And recently, I have read a few works by this particular group, and it's very interesting to actually also, at that point when I was writing the paper, I was not really thinking about how this can be considered at a global scale. But after I engaged some works, and particularly in the recent discussion about the monopolistic power of a few commercial publishers and their roles in the so-called north-south divide of knowledge production pertaining to article processing charges and so on, really leads me to really think that, this is something more broadly we have to actually think about as well, is the very fact that the authority of knowledge, which I actually indicated in the paper, that we basically attribute the moral and political authority of knowledge to, more or less kind of like two big data provider, which is Scopus and the Web of Science, that they actually, because the legitimacy of knowledge is contingent on a journal being indexed on these platforms, which in turn also they are contingent on citations and metrics. So the idea of metrics and epistemic injustice could be not just actually thinking about the reward system, but at a larger scale. But this, I think I'm just going to end here, because these are questions that I'd like to actually hear more thoughts from the audience and the group. So I suppose thank you so much, and I'll stop sharing here. I've been reading for a long time.
Thank you, Lai, for very exciting presentation. And it's our tradition to discuss papers and to ask various questions, comments, or critics. We are very friendly and open. So don't be scared. So I open the floor. If someone of you want to ask the question or raise the comment, please raise your hand either on the screen or on the chat by using button. So we can start. Franek, please.
Yeah, okay, so I can start. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it really highlights like important dimension of like metrics in academia nowadays, and like about like centers and peripheries, and like the questions from the last slide. I was like thinking like, would you consider like also in the future research to think about like different kinds of metrics, like with different like history and different purposes that are present in the academia, or like different metrics that have like different functions in different like geopolitical areas? Because like in this presentation I thought that you usually was talking about like metrics in general, and I was thinking, would you also consider like some like interesting and fruitful like divisions for like different kinds of metrics?
I think I might have to ask Emmanuel about this one in a way. The question in terms of like metrics is an umbrella term to include more or less what we call publication or citation-based metrics. So it's really counting the number of publications mainly, number of citations. So most of the metrics that are used, to my understanding, they basically based on these numbers. And I am not seeing other kinds of metrics are being used in research evaluation and in research assessments. So if there are different kinds of metrics, it would be good to actually really think about, you know, in a totally different talk, which I actually gave, basically that would be a practitioner talk. So a lot of bibliometrics librarians and scholarly communication librarians, I asked this particular question: what are we measuring for, right? So the metrics that I mentioned in this particular, you know, in this series of papers in many ways is this is for really ranking individuals in the sense that whether your work is good, whether your work is of good quality, whether your work has like very good impact. Now, the problem is that, you know, these metrics themselves might not actually represent quality or impact in the sense that, you know, some people will be kind of like, how can you also, are they actually comparable? You know, can you compare my metrics to your metrics? It's that simple. The thing is, we can actually think about, you know, whether these metrics align with the value of the research community or a university. Is competition to be the best is the only thing that we care about, or we actually want to value people? So from a science and semi-peripheries, you know, perspective, for example, can we actually think about that we measure how much you actually collaborate with researchers from areas that cannot afford research in the so-called global north, right? So that kind of collaboration, now collaboration in the discourse, in the sense that they encourage international collaboration, but at the same time, the idea is basically is to boost, you know, a lot of reasons that they are actually giving is that will increase the number of citations. More people will cite you. It is not about saying that we are actually going to try to really kind of, you know, to basically, you know, engage researchers in areas that they might not be up to standard, so to speak, or or like they are actually investing questions that are locally important but might not be actually important for the so-called global north at all. So there are other things that one can measure, like but at the moment, most measurements are really just basically is still in this particular game that we are thinking about. Okay, we want to be the top 10 university or whatever. It is not about to create common good. It is not, well, I won't say it is not about, but if we are actually thinking about common good, or taking the current a lot of discussions about how do we achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, a lot of those things I think actually is opposite to what we are trying to do by measuring using these metrics at the moment, because it basically engenders competition. It doesn't encourage collaboration or actually really helping out each other. I mean, if you look at, for example, even situations when people are stealing ideas from preprints, like a lot of these things are happening, or actually game the system to get more citations. I don't think what we're measuring is conducive to common good or conducive to knowledge production. I don't know, I think I have gone kind of sidetracked, but
Thank you,
No,
Leif.
thank you very much.
Addressing this hard question. Franek is well known because of his hard questions, and I encourage all of you to raise hand or just to start asking question to Lai. Okay, Tessa, please go.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. And Lai, thank you for your talk. That was really interesting.
thanks.
I was wondering, in your talk and in your paper, a couple of times you mentioned that metrics are not good or bad in themselves. And I think that's an interesting claim that you're making, given that later you say, like Goodhart's law, the measurement to a target, and then you talk about, well, what are metrics for? And the intention and the context is very much for competition. Can we still claim that metrics are just a measurement or just a number or just information and are neutral in that way? Or if you think about it more from a discourse standpoint, metrics by measuring at all, we're saying something. And that's something that we're saying means something that may not be neutral. I was wondering what you thought about that.
Thank you so much. That's a great question, and I really struggle with it. I suppose when I said metrics are not good and bad in and of itself, I suppose it goes back to the very idea that it is a number, it is an indicator. It's really in the sense of how we use it, right? And so I think it gets down to the very idea. I think in some kind of tradition, say in Latour's tradition, will be thinking that like even inanimate objects can have agency. So I will be still kind of in the school that will think that if you look at, say, I have a pen in my hand, and I don't think it is good or bad in itself. It's how I'm going to use it, in the sense that if I'm going to use it to write a very good paper or annotate a paper, that's supposedly a good use. But if I'm using it to actually stab someone and hurt someone and maybe kill somebody, then it's me who has the agency to do what I can do with it. So I am still kind of in that particular school, in the sense that, but like, I think you are right, and I might revise my thinking a little bit there, in the sense that, however, whether the design of metrics is intentionally to create these hierarchies. It is a question. It is a question that how can I answer that, right? Like in the sense that, you know, like I don't want to be sounding like conspiracy theories, you know, like in the sense, oh, Eugene Garfield, you know, when he invented this citation index, all he wanted to do was to put you guys into this competition and kill each other. and so I don't want to think about it that way. But then I suppose at the current moment, however, you know, I would not blame the designer, so to speak, but like I would probably actually think about it as a more systemic, you know, or when we actually think about the more kind of technocratic society, in the sense that the very kind of like asking people to devise a new measurements right now. So general impact factor has been here for so long, and the uses have changed. You know, like Eugene Garfield didn't think that this was going to become something how we use it today. As a systematic kind of like way of thinking about it, you know, the why my marketing manager chasing me after, going back to that particular point, that what is the general impact factor of your publication? I was so surprised, and that would be the point to really think that, you know, do you think that she had bad intention, or the metrics itself themselves had bad intention? I still kind of would think about the agency and how use it, and the very thing is that how it has been embedded in the system, that, you know, the marketing manager will be asking me that particular question without knowing what it really means or what it represents. So it's not a very good answer, but I hopefully I think it really opens up almost like more questions, and I need help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christian, would you like to help or attack?
Sure. I would say, you know, like if we stay in this, you know, like comment of metrics being not bad or good, either bad or good, the questions are neither as well. So I'm not sure if I will help or I will kill. But let's go to some comments or questions, because I really like this aspect that was mentioned by Tessa. And I think that the discussion of metrics needs some shift of the ground, and I think that symptometrics, bibliometrics community is not really capable of posing this question and needs some help by historians, and I'm not a historian as well, so I will not help here. But there are like two issues that needs to be addressed to understand whether the metrics do not have necessarily something inscribed in their design. And I would say, like, first of all, it's a geopolitical historical context of the work of Eugene Garfield. That is like the Cold War and, you know, like post-Sputnik atmosphere in US, and designing metrics in order to simply have a good track of what is going on, in Soviet science, more or less, like this one that was like somehow translated into English, and also to legitimize some kind of an advantage. I'm not saying this was the idea of Eugene Garfield, but it was like something in the atmosphere, like exactly like the situation that's repeated itself historically when the Shanghai ranking was in place. Like it was also designing of a form of measurement that's much specific geopolitical tension and allowed a specific player to achieve a hegemony. And I think that discussing metrics, we need to have that into somewhere in the background. And then I would like to cite more with a thesis that metrics are not innocent, at least not this one that this ones that we are relying right nowadays. And the second point that I want to mention, and it's like also opening more questions than giving answers, is the ground of philosophy, where I can be of help, because this is my background. I'm a philosopher, like most of us here in Poznan. surprisingly. Anyway, this is like a ontological ground, the political ontology of metrics, and we had some discussions like back in the years, like a few years ago, about exactly the two competitive, not competitive, like two ontologies of metrics designed on the one side by Derek de Sola-Price and on the other by Nalimov. And there were like, while Nalimov was inspired by both Price and Garfield, he was also inspired by a lot of strange ideas, and he was like a brilliant scholar. And he was relying in designing his metric system for science in his Naukometria. He was relying more on ideas that he was seeing science as biology, like through the prism of biology, organism, coherent wholes, and so on. And he was designing like a metric system based on the different ontology of relations. He was looking for measuring something else, something that is common between the researchers, not like Derek de Sola-Price, who delivered like philosophical template for Garfield, who was more relying on physics ideas, on atoms. And he was seeing like researchers, this is the opening words of his Little Science, Big Science, he was seeing like scientists like little atoms. And then the result is like atomized, ontology of relationship between the scientists. And what keeps them together is not the relation of cooperation, but as you perfectly presented in your paper, which I really like, is the relation of competition. So I would say that these are like two contexts from two different disciplines that I think that's are important for understanding the epistemic injustice produced by the individualized metrics that we are using right now at the moment. So thank you for your paper.
Thank you, Christian. That's really helpful. I'm going to contact you for the papers on the philosophers, because I'm not familiar with the work there. But I think that is something, when I got the first review of this particular paper, actually, that's the thing about the ontology, because I had to actually really kind of emphasize that I was not trying to talk about the ontology of metrics, because it's a very difficult issue to think about, and I think there's a lot of work should be actually done on it, and I totally agree. And I'm going to contact you for the papers that you mentioned there. And from the geopolitical point of view, I totally agree. And I recently actually read a book called The Knowledge Flows in a Global Age, and that's from a transnational approach. And obviously in the post-war era, and it really kind of like using different things to really actually think about how the United States perpetuate this kind of American hegemony. In that sense, I think, in other conferences, I will be very afraid of using this particular term, but in a way, to really, like in the sense of the sale of penicillin in other countries, to really kind of like establish themselves as the superpower of science, backed by capitalism. So historically, I think that there is evidence coming out, or people are actually really, not, I think a lot of American historians or particular researchers from the United States, they are also kind of like, in that particular hegemony, to think about, we are the best, and we are going to create this game that will make us look the best. To a certain extent, right? Because if you create a game, you can, and as you mentioned, the Shanghai ranking is to a certain extent, why would they be counting Nobel laureates, for example? Because if you create this particular game to make yourself win. So it is very, very interesting in that particular sense of how kind of like at a country level, these particular hierarchies or league tables can be used to project I suppose geopolitical power and so on. So it's a very, very interesting area. But again, I like reading quite broadly, but I cannot claim to be a historian either. So, so like I look forward to more discussions, and I've been following many of your works here, and I know that you're also drawing from a lot of this literature that I have not been exposed to. So it's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I see that Alex has raised a hand. Alex, please.
Hi, Lai. Nice to see you. Hello.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, so first I just wanted to echo the earlier point about Goodhart's law. It really annoys me. I think it's a cliche and it's definitely overused in this context. So I'm glad other people seem to think broadly the same. Yeah, so I've not quite formulated this question in my head yet, so we'll see how far we get with it. But I was going to ask about, where does epistemic injustice leave us? So for example, I think that often epistemic injustice is about, well, it gives me the impression anyway that it's quite an anti-numbers kind of conclusion, because it points to injustices, and therefore the place we want to get to perhaps is just to abandon these kinds of numbers, because they're reductive, they do displacement, they kind of render a lot of forms of value invisible, etc., etc. But then I suppose there's another way of thinking about injustice, which is in scientometrics. What they often will do is that they'll look for how to ameliorate these systems, like databases and coverage, for example. So, if non-English language publications are not well covered in the databases, we need to make that better. So there's a kind of technical fix, and so yeah, I guess that would be the question. Like, do you think an epistemic injustice lens pushes you down more of an anti-metrics, let's abandon them kind of road, or do you think there's still a door left open to try and minimize injustices through improving the technical infrastructure?
Right, that's a very big question, and I'm very afraid to answer that. I think in the paper I did mention one thing. I really, really appreciate the work of bibliometric studies and scientometric studies, in the sense that, because if we see that these data are actually neutral and objective, and they are still, to a certain extent, I think quite a few papers basically is saying that, metrics and at the aggregated level, they're still actually very useful in kind of understanding what's going on in knowledge production. So including, all of those papers that will be pinpointing, if we don't have bibliometric on scientometric studies, we would not know that there's disparity in kind of the productivity or performance that's based on race, gender, or even actually subject areas. I don't want to raise every question is about race and gender, but it is not the case, because when I talk about this epistemic injustice here, I really actually also want to involve in the idea of very much that, some humanities research or some social sciences research or some science research, they are deemed as lower quality because their numbers are low. But the problem is that these numbers are not really comparable. But regardless, going back to that particular point, I suppose to talk about, whether we should abandon these numbers, then I totally would hope that these metrics will stay, because otherwise, what are you bibliometrics and metric people are going to do with our Web of Science and Scopus data? I don't know, because they are used as data, but they have to be valid enough to be used as data. And I think that's the one thing that I mentioned in the paper, but is a kind of out of scope, and I didn't really kind of like think in depth about it, right? But the problem now is that the use of metrics affect the validity of these data, and they also perpetuate epistemic injustice. So it again I suppose going back to that particular point, I don't think if we only used these data as data, that it is a problem, you know, and all of this type of data, I would call it normative objective, because they are not like the measurement of a table. You know, citations, I think the literature has already told us that, you know, like how we choose to cite is, you know, to a certain extent subjective already, or you can say that it's normative. It is based on certain norms, and this is why I say normative objective in that particular sense. You know, there's a certain level of, you know, some people will call it social constructivist or whatsoever. Now, so it's a very, very difficult question there. And I think, you know, again, going back to that particular point, when I say metrics are not good and bad as in themselves, I suppose that's a point to really try to say that it is the uses, how we actually use it. In the sense that I suppose, you know, there are different choices, that we measure something else for research evaluation, or not measuring something at all, in the sense of we don't use actually metrics in research evaluation. Then these data might be more valid and more important for bibliometric and scientometric study. Because if the metrics are not going to be gained, then we don't have the danger of saying that, oh, this person has these numbers, and, you know, because it really actually in the sense that, you know, it's making the data themselves actually not valid when these numbers are basically gained, and somebody is going to ask that particular question down the road. How can you talk about, you know, like scientific collaborations when the numbers are actually being boosted or downgraded in one way or another in the whole scholarly knowledge production system? So yes, responsible uses, but I don't know, like in the sense that, you know, my idea is almost kind of like, I think a lot of talks right now in terms of responsible metrics, I think the question is whether you use it at the individual level, because at the individual level, it really leads people to compete with each other to game, or whether these numbers can be used in a more like in a holistic way that doesn't kind of get down to an individual level, how to basically prevent that particular gaming, you know, how to avert all of these goal displacement type of thing. I'm sure what you guys are thinking a lot about that. Why don't you tell me? So does it make sense?
Yeah, it's from my perspective, it's all the questions raised today are extremely difficult, and we are referring to the basic and the most difficult questions regarding scientometrics, bibliometrics, the agency of metrics, whether they are neutral or not. From my perspective, using metric is inevitable. It's not possible to think about not only science, but modern society without measuring. But Laia, I would like to ask you, what do you think, what has been the key driver for using metrics in science now? What is the key driver of using metrics in higher education and science, from your perspective?
From my perspective, I think the key driver, if from the point of view of like, actually, like I didn't actually mention that in the presentation, but it's in the paper. And again, it is something that I haven't explored and thought about very deeply, but Helmut Ross's work, in the sense that, you know, I am very much having kind of the underlying, there's a lot of Habermasian thinking in this paper and other papers, is in the sense of how we actually introduce something like money, how we introduce a particular piece of, what I call technology, but it could be also a standard that basically to try to stop people from talking a lot and then switching that particular power to those who use this technology and to use these metrics. And in this particular case, when like, I suppose it was not very explicit in my paper, but the very thing in the current system, when you're actually thinking about that, is that who benefit most from these metrics? I think we ought to ask that particular question. And for me, it seems to be Scopus and Web of Science. And they determine what is knowledge. They determine, they sell this data. I don't know how much your university is paying for Scopus and paying for related services. This data also is being sold to university rankings, right? So in the sense that who benefit most from basically like getting people to compete, I think we ought to ask that particular question. And this is the question also at the global level, as I kind of like very briefly mentioned at the end of the talk, is that who holds the power, like who decides, who is the authority of knowledge? Is it the indexing, company or the data analytics company, or is it us? And I think we ought to ask that particular questions because we don't own the metrics, we're being told. I think that's my answer for now.
Thank you. Thank you. I do like this answer. Are any other comments or questions? I don't see on the list of participants, and I see no raised hands. So, Lai, thanks a lot for giving us a very exciting talk, and as you can see, very provocative in terms of raising extremely difficult questions, I would say, to all of us, because we still struggle with addressing those questions. And I hope we will see during the next seminars. If some of you are not subscribing our newsletter, Christian just posted on chat link to newsletter. We post just information about our seminars and some activities. It's not a spam. If you would like to stay in touch with us, please subscribe. And Lai, once again, thanks a lot, and keep fighting with metrics and epistemic injustice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Bye.